Hi everyone and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is a guest webinar with a colleague of ours, Derek Bishop from the Culture Consultancy. I'm going to introduce Derek in just a minute or two, and we're going to be, well, Derek's mostly going to be doing the expertise speaking around future-proofing your organisational culture. So let's do a quick intro and just explain a few bits of housekeeping. So this is me, guys. I'm Adrian McDonough. I'm one of the co-founders here at Hireful. I won't spend too long on that side of things. Our mission here is we exist to help everyday organisations to recruit better. So let's, and I also always tend to start with a little poll just to see where people are at. We've been doing this since the start of lockdown, so if you would happily work with me on this, we do a little recruitment status poll. It's like a health temperature check for us in the recruitment world just to see how quickly this economy is bouncing back. Bouncing back might be a bit of an exaggeration, but if you can give us your insight to your organisation, that would be great. I'll leave that on the screen for about 10 seconds. I'll just count down, sort of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So thank you for voting on that, guys. Let me just, I'll share that with you as well so you guys can see it, and I'll briefly talk about it. It's not really why you're here, but I'll just sort of say, well, it's sort of interesting, isn't it? It's sort of a lot of people recruiting as usual. Recruitment freeze is quite big as well, though. So we've certainly seen less and less the recruitment freeze options, and we see more people getting back to something closer to normal. But anyway, that's by the by. Let's just explain how the housekeeping is going to work. So there's more people just signing into the webinar now. So we are keeping the lines muted. There's quite a few people on the session. It'll be me and Derek going through. We've got a few questions that we've set up and prepared that we're going to walk through on this subject. So we'll keep it nice and conversational. But Derek, is keen as well for your questions. So if you think of a question as we're talking, just post it onto the GoToWebinar question panel, and we will cover them off as many as we can, depending on how many there are. But assuming a normal level, we should be able to get through them all at the end of the conversation. So without further ado, let me minimize my screen and let me send a little webcam request through to Derek. We tested this just a minute ago, so I'm sure it'll work fine. Hi Derek, how you doing? Can't hear you. Is there a little switch for audio? Oh no, I've muted you, my bad. Let's see. I think you're self-muted, Derek, if you can hear me. So, there we go.
Yeah, okay. There we go.
Now you're good. Well, everyone's used to this now. This sort of Zoom sessions, it always starts with, can you hear me? Can you see me? It's sort of, I'm sure actual face-to-face meetings might end up starting like this just through habit as we all get back to
when they start again.
How's your normal looking these days, Derek, just quickly? And maybe just briefly explain your background and Culture Consultancy.
Yeah, so I'm a co-founder of Culture Consultancy, and we specialise in designing and embedding business cultures to drive future success. So whether that be about enabling business or digital transformation, rapid growth, acquisition or high performance. So for us, it's all about changing mindset, behaviours, ingrained work practices so that you've got a future-proof culture which will fuel your future success, whatever that driver is. And we've been going there for 10 years and working across many different sectors and sizes of businesses are really about changing those mindsets and getting that culture really enabling the business and the success so that actually everybody is able to perform to their very best because we fundamentally believe business success can only be achieved by enabling your people to be the best.
Yeah. So, well, I could talk about this subject a lot, but I want to just maybe keep on the bit we've structured. So let's start with some of these questions around future-proofing. So what are some of the changes you're seeing in the business environment, either new or, accelerated changes, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I think, we've been talking about operating in what I call a VUCA environment for a number of years now, but I sort of think, the VUCA world that we've got is actually, it's almost like the speed dial has been turned up significantly. And, just for those in terms of like really understanding what VUCA means, it's all about, having been a very volatile environment. The nature, dynamics and pace of change are just phenomenal and things are just rapidly changing and turbulent. So yeah, if ever there was a time that we've been in it, there's certainly been some significant volatility with it. And then with that is this increasing complexity and yeah, the lack of predictability, the prospect of surprise, and we've certainly had that, and we'll continue to get that as well. And just like a sense of an awareness and understanding that issues and events are so much greater than what we think they are in the moment. So whereas maybe previously we'd have thought desired outcomes, even from very familiar situations, were quite predictable, I think that's no longer the case. And so actually that's bringing, you know, certainly a different guise of complexity within an organization, which is like the third area, all that complexity. There's, you know, the challenges of these globally connected economies and societies is making the environment for us to all operate in as businesses just so complicated. But on the flip side, we also have a very ambiguous environment. Yeah, the haziness of reality and the mixed meanings of situations and the cause and effect of that confusion, and we're seeing that with the changing circumstances we're getting now here in the UK in terms of localized lockdown or change of guidance, etc. You know, the outcomes that we get are just completely different. It's no longer a binary thing. So, you know, probably in talking about that, I'm guessing most people can think, actually, this sounds and feels very familiar for what we've been through over the last few months. And I think what I'm seeing is that because the speed dial has been turned up on that VUCA sort of environment, what I'm seeing in businesses is that there seems to be a lot less longer term planning that's happening. Instead, what I'm seeing is, business leaders are setting out like strategic intentions or strategic ambitions, and then looking at very near-term actions that take them in the right direction. So rather than working through a full sort of roadmap of, that's our strategic intention, that's our plan, and going away and executing it, is actually, here's the strategic ambition, right, what are the actions we can take now to take us closer to that. So it's almost like there's an increasingly immediacy environment that, once a business has made a decision, they want to crack on with it straight away with, to some extent, very limited sort of time for planning or design. It feels like a bit of a let's do type environment. It's almost like for some, you just need to slow down a little bit to speed up, because what I'm seeing is that there is a certain amount of waste or rework and unproductivity that comes with that, ambition straight into action without that bit in the middle. So that, I think that's one of the key things for me is that is started to change, is that uncertainty, that volatility is just driving a different pace. So that'll be probably my first point. And I think what I'm seeing in the second area for me is around sustainable development goals. Have sort of, the UN, those goals, they've gone up in the priority of some businesses' agendas. Their drive and ambitions have heightened in importance as a result of COVID-19. So it's almost like COVID-19 has been a forced catalyst to bring about some fundamental change. For example, like banning or significantly reducing travel. Not just now for the here and now for the lockdowns, but for the long term. We've got a number of businesses where they're saying they're committed to their reducing their carbon footprint, and for some that's quite a dramatic effect on the way they do business. Because they're now becoming a much more remote or digital first business, and for some industries or disciplines that's a challenge. Particularly for salespeople, or perhaps are used to a face-to-face sales environment. How do salespeople build relationships when they can't actually fundamentally go and see people face to face? And so I think it's quite interesting is that how COVID is being used as a catalyst for some of those bigger environmental organizational shifts that need to go with that. And that for me ties in with how some businesses are then exploring going to a location agnostic type of thing, whereby actually, do we need our people to come into the workplace in the future? Do they, so therefore, do our employees need to actually live and work within a commutable distance or an easily transportable distance? So I think from a business point, business leaders, I think, challenging whether we need to have this workspace because we've proven remote working can work. And then from an employee's point of view, they're actually saying, well, do I need to be doing that traveling? And, could I get some time back? And actually for some, it's helping people to think, well, do I need to live within the commuter belt? And so I've seen a number of instances where people are challenging whether they can move somewhere more remote out of commuterville. We even had an employee at one of our clients where they've asked to work whether they would be able to work in Barbados using the welcome stamp visa.
I saw that.
Yeah, and they're encouraging people to come and work from home in Barbados for a year. And actually, somebody, one of our clients was really quick off the mark and saying, "Is this doable?" And it's quite fascinating how, therefore, people are thinking about how this can change from a business point of view, but also for people themselves. So that creates an opportunity for employees, but that also creates an opportunity for businesses as well, because if you remove the constraint of location, your access to a talent pool can actually significantly enhance, because actually if somebody doesn't need to be within a commutable or easily travelable distance, even if they would only be in the office or in the workplace for a couple of days a week, actually if they don't need to, you open up a whole lot of different wider talent pool, and with that I think brings some real diversity and inclusion opportunities. Even within, if we think about the UK, not thinking about maybe having people in other countries, but if people with with disabilities or older female workers who perhaps weren't logistically able to, constrained, so couldn't get into the workplace, there was a study done by Mercer that shows that in the UK alone, our potential workforce by 2025 could increase by 1.8 million. And then if you look at older employees as well, then that could be another 900,000. By 2025, we could have another 2 to 3 million people that were available to work because we've removed that sort of location type thing. So I think that's quite an interesting trend that I'm starting to see, whereby some businesses are just saying, well, do we really need our people close to the workplace? Now, I accept for some organizations, there's the physical work that does need to take place. So it's some organizations, it can't work in its entirety, but I think most businesses can challenge, well, do some of their teams that are office-based, do they actually need to come in? And I think it's it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's how can you make the most of the opportunity for the business side of things, and also from an employee perspective. So I think that's quite an interesting dynamic. And then when you play in the whole awareness about the inclusion and diversity has been something that has been really important for quite a while, but obviously events over recent weeks and months has just accelerated that awareness, that pressure, and that drive. So I think actually now we're seeing businesses, yes, they're asking a lot more questions about what do they need to do, because it can no longer be a tick box exercise. It's got to be done, and you've got to have a proper ED&I strategy around it, not just tactical things. So I think there's quite some fundamental shifts there in terms of how businesses are doing things, or how they're now starting to reimagine the future.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know if you've come across organisations who have just got rid of their head office, because I think there's one thing maybe having that more flexibility, which I think is going to become a lot more prevalent. I think that's where a lot of organisations will be. And there's another thing saying we don't have a base of operations. They're two very different things from my perspective. It's always good. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's almost going back to our roots or something, having one place where we can get together that we call our own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is something about that, and actually you've got some people actually love working remotely. Some people don't enjoy it. They need to be around people. Some people aren't able to really sort of like work from their home because they don't have the right setup, and some people just want to mix. Maybe whereas they were in the workplace 5 days a week before, maybe they want to go and get some of that social interaction and get it over 2 to 3 days rather than it being a full 5 days. So I think it's probably going to be a blended approach that we need to offer to our people. I do know some are going on the very extreme of, okay, we can do away with our offices completely now.
Yeah, well, at least everyone knows the answer to that question pretty much, because we've all tried it. And
yeah, the genie's out of the bottle. It's like we proved we can make it work. I guess the key thing is that actually we've got to make it work in a sustainable type way, because some of the ways which we've muddled through and we got through the early parts of the crisis, I don't think we're through it by any stretch, but the intense, immediate lockdown and really tight restrictions, we proved we can make it work and get through. We just sort of need to work into that more sustainable ways of working.
Cool. Okay. So let's move on to the next one we've got. So what impacts are these organisational changes then having on culture, as you see it?
Well, I mean, if we just pick up on that point that we just sort of started touching on there, I think, what we've got to be careful of is that, through the crisis, we lifted the way we did things when we're physically together in a workplace, and we adopted the remote working. But those practices aren't always going to be sustainable in terms of the way we've just lifted and dropped them and made them tactically work. So the culture and the work practices and the dynamics are somewhat different for a business where you are operated remotely, and actually, so it's almost like now use the opportunity to reimagine and redesign the future ways of working from a remote first. Okay, so it's almost like go back to what's the employee experience we need to deliver, and what does that look like from a remote first perspective? How do our processes work in an online environment, in a remote environment? How do we keep things secure? So rather than going from an evolutionary, like we were doing it this and we've dramatically changed to tactically get us working, I think it's actually just we need to reimagine, and that means that we need to rethink the culture that we need within the organisation to support that remote working. So I think sort of just following on from where we started chatting now, I think that will be one area of thinking about the redesign. And then I think there's, if we link back to like the VUCA side of things and what impact that has, I think there is increasingly amount of, blurred boundaries between roles and functions and how teams operate. So traditionally, people are very used to using like work-related boundaries or different functions within a business. But what we're seeing is that traditional functional approach is starting to change to a much more cross-functionality approach, a more fluid operating structure. Matrix structures still exist, but they're being used more, and definitely teams being brought together almost for mission critical challenges, and they're coming together, they deliver, and they disperse, and they get reassigned onto other things. So the whole functional, like traditional functional way of looking at things, which keeps things very clean, I think is becoming a lot more fluid, and I think that trend is going to continue. And it's not neat and straightforward. So your communication needs to be a lot different. Your leadership and how you're reporting and keeping people informed, all that needs to change. So I think those blurred and fluid boundaries are gonna just accelerate because of what we've been through, and the need for us to be really flexible and resilient in how we do things. Obviously the demands that are now placed on us are significantly higher, and we therefore need to be. We've got to make some really tough reprioritizations and be constantly, not as individuals, teams, as leaders, and as businesses overall, because the dynamics keep changing, that I think we have to have that constant reprioritization and checking in. Are we focusing on the big things? That needs to become even more prevalent within cultures as well, really. And in order to deal with the complexity, we're needing to respond really quickly because our expectations of customers and that we're going to be building much more complexity in our business in order to keep things as simple as possible for our customers. And again, it requires a different type of thinking. And I think, one of the things that is quite evident through the last few months is the adoption of and reliance on technology. It's just accelerated. And it's been, our pace of change with technology and our advancements has been increasing over the last decade anyway. But this has really pushed it to the through at a very fast rate. And I was speaking to one of the leaders within one of our clients the other day. He heads up the sales function within a financial services business, where most of the sales team were sort of, it's very relationship-based sales. And those predominantly that would have been done face-to-face before. And obviously the lockdown has forced them to adopt technology and to do the sales over Zoom, Teams, etc. And his comment to me, which was really interesting, is that for each month of lockdown, he believed it's achieved technology advancement and adoption in his business area of equivalent of what would have been in 1 year in a non-COVID environment. So in 3 months of lockdown, he's accelerated technology adoption for what would have taken 3 years before. And I think that's a really interesting observation, that it's had that effect. It's almost like we've had to, but we've made a leap. And actually there's probably going to be, there is no going back. What we need to do is continue that. Whether we keep it at that pace, I don't know. But there's that adaptability and resilience is going to be quite key, because the pace of change is only going to get faster. So we're going to need, organizational cultures, and our people are going to need to be much more resilient, much more, agile has been talked about in terms of change delivery, but the agility and adaptability of our people is going to be quite key, and we're going to need to be very curious and proactive about things. So I think that's an interesting, we've been forced into this, and that's an interesting outcome that's happened, and we need to keep that going on. What it does create is a bit of responsibility on leaders to create a psychologically safe environment and support employee well-being, which has been really important over the last few months, and I only see that continuing. But the whole psychological safety thing is not just important from an employee perspective, employee well-being, but it's also one of the key characteristics for high-performing teams. And so creating that environment is really key, so that people feel safe, valued, respected, and supported, and able to challenge and do all that in a non-face-to-face environment. So I think there's quite a leadership responsibility there, which leaders need to take accountability for, building that level of trust. So I think that's quite there's quite some. It's easy to say those things, and people think, oh yeah, agile, etc., but the whole dynamics and creating that challenging environment, but doing that remotely, I just really think is something that organizations need to think through to really make it work for them. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for that. That's how can we make it work for us?
I think an awful lot of organizations probably maybe don't even realize they need to do that. They'll find out in the future when they see all these problems emerge. Because I'd imagine a lot of these mental health problems, many of them won't just emerge during lockdown. They'll emerge months and maybe even a couple of years later, as people sort of realize how much pressure they've been under for how long. And and
I think the thing that we've got to be very mindful of is many businesses have provided tools, support, etc., for people to help themselves and enable them to deal with it themselves and have that support function. But one of the things I am hearing and seeing is that the tools are there, but unfortunately people are under so much pressure to deliver under some quite tough circumstances that the irony is they don't have the time and space to be able to tap into the tools. So we've got to be really conscious leaders and not just provide tools and assume everything's okay, that people will adopt them. Actually is realize, what are our people really, are they really paying attention to their emotional well-being? And I think for that, leaders need to, one way you can get to genuine answer by that is really leaders talking about how they're coping with things, and the reality of well, I'm not coping well with this, and this is how I've dealt with it. Is that authentic leadership and putting yourself out there and saying, it's not all rosy for me. It needs to be that quite connected leadership, so that, because it's proven that when you step forward and demonstrate that things aren't, things haven't been easy for me, and this is how I've managed, or these are the things I've learned, and this is what I'm doing. When you then ask the question of the other person of, so how are you doing? Your likelihood of getting a genuine and honest answer significantly increases, to compare to you just saying, so how are you? Are you coping okay? And people say, oh yeah, because they don't really want to open up. So I think there's a whole, on that point, Adrian, there's a real thing around connected leadership and being human. Let's say, but COVID has taught us, like, yes, we can use all the technology, but we're all humans, we're all people. We've had huge amounts of vulnerability, and the whole thing has been from a people safety point of view, and we've got to remember that and keep that going, not just from the COVID-19, the virus, but actually from that mental and physical well-being. So it's going to require that level of leadership, I think.
Yeah, sounds tough. I suppose having those conversations with people know that you're genuinely interested, and it's not just small talk. It's not just like, how are you doing, that sort of thing. It's like you've got to go beyond that a bit deeper, and you have, and you've got to really model the way. And I don't mean just like, absolutely, it's not about providing lip service to it or acknowledgement or pointing to it. It's actually, you've got to show and demonstrate that you're a human being, and that it's presented challenges for you and how you've adapted to it and things you've learned about yourself as well. And I think that allows you to connect with people, particularly when you're not seeing them face to face in the way that you would have done before. And I think that just changes the conversation. And again, with one of our clients, we had he's got over 2,000 employees. And on he has a fortnightly call, all hands call, and on one of those calls, he actually openly talked about his challenges, what he'd learned from it, what his coping techniques were, what he was going to do. But what was really interesting was he then challenged everybody to say, I want you to go and talk to your line manager today and just share your own experiences. And what that opened up was absolutely phenomenal in terms of a level of understanding about what people have been grappling with, what they're concerns with, the situations they've been coping with. And it's just significant shift in terms of the openness and the environment within that, just by that one action of the senior leader showing that level of openness that had not been displayed before. And that's priceless. You've now got all the senior leaders following that through and actually just commenting in terms of that changed the game for us in terms of the openness we have. And I think it's actions like that we've really got to, as leaders, we've really got to push through. Yeah, we've all got to learn some new skills and get comfortable in some areas that we're not maybe comfortable in. Yeah, you're making me very uncomfortable with these thoughts, but you're right, I'm not arguing with you. So let's move on. Let's look at how's all this going to have to change the way businesses are designed and structured then, Derek?
Yeah, so I think, picking up the thing around the adaptability, the flexibility and the resilience, I think quite a lot of businesses have been designed previously been designed from an effectiveness and a workflow efficiency perspective. It's all about throughput, efficiency, but I don't think that's going to be sustainable, because I think that need for resilience and adaptability, I think, can completely break a very efficient process or sets of processes. So, and that breakage will cost you more than the efficiencies that you might be getting out of it. So I think we've got to redesign from the way we do things from yes, we want effectiveness, we want efficiency, we want people doing the right things in the right way, optimize performance, but we've got to build in that ability to respond and adapt and flex quite quickly, because otherwise that will catch us out. So I think just rethinking about how we do things from that perspective, and it's not all about efficiency. Efficiency needs to be there, but flexibility needs to be there as well. And which sort of leads me on to this point I talked about briefly earlier on about really thinking about, well, do we need to have the same level of functional job roles that we used to have, okay, or we've had up until now? So should we look at just bringing together like these challenge teams to work on big strategic goals with a bit more of a dynamic, fluid workforce rather than the functional roles? Now, you might, for some roles you might need specialisms like, risk and compliance or HR, etc., where there's actually, you've got to look across the whole organization. But for other, if you look at your strategic goals, and many organizations have done this in terms of like holacracy and looking at customer, aligning yourself behind the customers and creating that customer experience teams. But and so I think what we can do is take that thinking and apply it to how do we align behind strategic goals, take those same principles and bring together teams to really deliver on that. But it means that it's quite a dynamic and fluid workforce, or the way you use, the way you use your resources and your skills and expertise is a lot less set in its structure. And that has significant impacts for us in terms of how we approach our people, our talent, the types of talent you need to recruit, and things like career development. So I think, my challenge to businesses is, given the pace and change and complexity of it and the responsiveness, do those traditional structures work in their entirety? And I think some of them can be changed into much more strategic goal alignment, and then maybe some enabling functions where you do need to keep that functional alignment because it's organization wide. And absolutely, I would be recommending this. Reinvent yourself from a digital or remote first perspective, including redesigning your end-to-end employee experience. Because I think businesses are currently, some are still in this place of, okay, when I can bring people back into the workplace. I was talking to COO a couple of weeks ago, and he's got 50 people he's waiting to onboard. And his HR team were all in the mindset of how can we get them into the workplace so that we can do their induction and train them up. And his challenge is, no, the answer's got to be, how do we induct these people remotely? It may not be 100% on board in an induction, but it needs to be at least be a significant percent. We can't wait to bring people in. We've got to reimagine and redesign and do that intentionally, because that's where we'll get the benefit. That's where we'll get the flexibility that we're going to need to get us through, however long this pandemic is going to go and the various waves and lockdowns we're going to go through, but also for a sustainable future as well. So I think now is the opportunity to really redesign things from an HR perspective, from deploying teams, those traditional structures. Go back and think, what do you really need? And that would be one of my key things in terms of encouraging people to do that.
Okay. And then from a leadership perspective then, management perspective, how does this all shape up? It sounds like people at the top are going to have some quite big challenges.
Yeah, and we started talking about them a few minutes ago, didn't we, in terms of that, that need for very empathetic, connected leadership. And it's going to be about balancing and integrating both the human and the performance results dynamics. COVID has very much brought the humanness side to businesses, and businesses done some phenomenal things to keep people safe, get people geared up to work from home. But what this is going to need is that human-centered leadership, and leaders are going to need to be even more effective at communicating, in a powerful way and engaging way across a range of media, because they can't bring together the town halls in which they used to do, type things, but they're going to need to demonstrate that connected leadership and very empathetic leadership. It would be my first point. But I think at the same time, leaders are going to have to be, they're having to spend much more time thinking about, well, what does this mean? How do we redesign our business? Some of that enabling the strategies and enabling the innovation to happen. So, I think, leaders are going to need to spend more time on that than maybe they have done previously, rightly or wrongly. But what that means is that line managers, like first line managers or whatever, are going to have to step up and do more of that people leadership than maybe they would have done before. And that's going to be, I think for some, that worries me a little bit, because manager capabilities need to be enhanced, because some managers are going to be dealing with some very ambiguous situations, and their level of certainty is going to be a lot lower about what's happening. They're going to have less information available to them. So I think one thing for us to challenge is, are we setting our managers up for success in terms of their capabilities for leading and managing in this new way, because of the dynamic change and the remote working side of things. I think linked to that is going to be the speed of decision making is accelerating, and so where I think leaders and managers have historically relied on a lot more data and facts to give them the answers to what to do, I think a lot more is going to be based on judgment. And yes, there's going to be gathering insight, gathering data, but I think it's going to be a lot more about judgment and taking informed risks rather than waiting for loads of trended data to give you the exact answer. So even from a workforce planning point of view, maybe, I think, managers may have been, tracking the volumes over a period of a few months, and then seasonality variations come in, and you're able to make recruitment decisions based on that. But that might have been, you'd be tracking it over months. I think all of that sort of stuff is now going to be much more in the, you're tracking it over weeks, and you're going to need to be quicker with your speed of action and decision making of actually, we're going to need more resources. And this is where the whole fluid nature of your workforce might come into play, about reassigning resources really quickly. Again, we've probably done that through COVID, but I think that's going to be a sustained way in which we're going to need to operate to create those fluid and making some of those decisions probably with a lot less hard facts and data than we might have done before. And that's going to be challenging for some, I think, because for some, data directs them to the answer. And I think actually the data will take you so far, but judgment, I think, intuition and judgment is going to increase in its importance in terms of what's going to be needed, and making the right decisions at the right time. And except sometimes we won't make the right decision, but we made the best decision at that time based on the information we had available. So let's learn, move on, and fail fast and and move forward.
Yeah, better than, in many cases, not making a decision. That's definitely the wrong in many occasions. Sometimes not, but yeah. And so let's throw it out and see if we get any questions coming through. So Derek, you obviously spend a decent amount of time thinking about all these changes and what's going to happen 12 months on. I worry that, like you said at the start, business leaders are sort of very much in the mindset of the next 3 months, the next 6 months. So there's no one really taking stock of, there's discussions around what the new normal will be, but nobody's really thinking that through in great detail. So it'd be interesting to see, the pitch that you're making as how you see these forces impacting organizations and culture. Interesting to see the reaction. So feel free to post some questions, guys, or feel free to even just post a reaction as to whether you have a different opinion. Who knows?
Yeah, absolutely. It's my view based on what I'm seeing, but I'm not seeing every sector and every type of business. I'm just sort of looking at the common trends, and I think
I can see how it applies to us at the moment. Obviously, I look at it from our perspective first and foremost. I think one of the things I saw early in this period, which is just still not the futures thinking stuff, very much in the middle of it, is you quickly saw whether organisations really were their values, or whether they were just things they put up around, their building. And in reality, it was just the guy at the top saying, whether it's the head of Wetherspoons saying, well, we're not paying our staff that we've furloughed until the government pays us the money. It's like, well, you've got staff who need, to pay their rent and mortgages, So is that one of your values really? Is that, I've never seen that as a value coming out of your organisation. But so yeah, so that's an extreme example, but I'm sure individual situations of employees, it's like, does the company go for their values, or do they sort of flex to where they think they need to protect the business a bit? So
yeah, and I think you're absolutely right in that observation, Agent. Now, obviously, yeah, there's going to be some tough decisions that the organisations are going to have been making, and there is inevitably redundancies, but for me, it's about those values also drive how you go through that exercise, how you support people, how you treat those people through any situation like that where you've got a significant number of redundancies, because that's about the employee experience as well. And nobody wants to be in that experience, but at least when you do it, you need to stand true to your values and follow that all the way through. And yeah, I totally agree with you in terms of you can't say one thing and do something else, because yeah, what you've said and what you do is what you do that really matters.
You might never been under pressure to prove that you are those values, because the values, they probably come from your staff. You position them everywhere, and you talk about them a lot, and you build it into your recruitment and everything else, perhaps, and maybe even your sales and marketing material. But then, have they ever really been tested? And for many organisations, this is their first test. So
no, nothing like a crisis to really. Yeah, nothing like a real crisis to heighten the awareness of everything. And I think, for the big brands, it would be those that did all the right things that will come through the strength of this, just like, for the economic crisis back in 2008, this is a different crisis, but those brands that treated things and did the right things back then got through that. I think it's the same is going to be happening here in terms of what really paves the way, and because people will remember, you will be remembered for what you did, good or bad. You will be remembered.